Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear student, Assalamu alaikum. I'm Muhammad Shoaib, your instructor for the course Introduction to Economics. The course code of this course is ECO-101 and this is lecture number 9. We have already discussed or we have already taken 8 classes. Um the topic for this lecture is market equilibrium. The reference book that I have also given to you people in soft is Principles of Economics. The name of the author is Gregory Mankiw, and this is 8th edition of the book. The reference chapter for our this lecture is chapter number 4 of the book Principles of Economics, written by Mankiw. Up till now, we have discussed the following topics in our previous 8 lectures. We defined economics in quite detail. We've also discussed the nature and scope of economics. And we discussed the 10 principles of economics, and we also discussed the concept of consumer behavior in economics. I've also given to you people an introduction to the market forces. What are the market forces? How they affect the market. Similarly, we discuss the law of demand and the law of supply, and we discuss the factors which are affecting the demand curve and the supply curve. The factors are basically the shift factors which are causing a shift in the demand curve and the supply curve. In this lecture, after this lecture, you people will be able to learn about the nature of market equilibrium. We are going to define what is market equilibrium, what are the different components of the market equilibrium, and with the help of an example, we are going to reach to the market equilibrium in the market. Similarly, we are going to discuss the concept of shortage and the concept of surplus in the market, and lastly we are going to discuss the steps which are involved in analyzing changes in the market equilibrium. Whenever a change occurs in either the demand curve or the supply curve, what will have its impact on the market equilibrium. So we are going to discuss the steps in detail in which we analyze the changes in the market equilibrium. Before going into the detail, let's define what is market equilibrium. Market equilibrium is a situation in the market in which the quantity demanded becomes equal to the quantity supplied. When the quantity demanded becomes equal to this quantity supplied, or market equilibrium can be defined as in the market when the price reaches to a level. At that price, when the quantity demanded becomes equal to the quantity supplied, we call that situation as equilibrium situation. Situation in which the seller are willing to sell a specific commodity to the buyer and the buyer are willing to buy a specific commodity from the seller, and they both agree on the price and the quantity. So that situation is called market equilibrium. Equilibrium price is the price that balances quantity supplied and quantity demanded. The price on which both the buyer and the seller they agree. So that price is basically the equilibrium price. So the factor that brings equilibrium in the market is basically the price. The price is the factor that brings equilibrium in the market. On a graph, it is the price at which the supply and the demand curve intersect. Similarly, equilibrium quantity. The quantity supplied and the quantity demanded at the market price is basically the equilibrium quantity. On a graph, it is the quantity at which the supply curve and the demand curves that intersect. Suppose uh, we are in a market for ice cream cone. On left hand side, the demand schedule for the ice cream cone is given to you people, the price of the ice cream cone and the market for the ice cream cone. On the right hand side, the supply schedule for the ice cream cone is given to you people. If you look at the left hand side, different prices are given to you people at $0. Almost all of the units, suppose there are the 19 units of a commodity demanded by the people. There are people whose maximum capacity is to demand 19 units. So if the price of the commodity is zero, all of the units are demanded by the consumer. If the price slightly increases, the number of people who want that commodity, that decline. The law of demand start to operate. When the price further increases from zero point 0.5 to $1, the quantity demanded also declines. So there is a negative relationship between the price of the commodity, price of the ice cream cone, and the demand for ice cream cone. When the price reaches to $3 per ice cream cone, a single unit of the commodity is demanded. If it further increases, not a single unit of the commodity will be demanded. If we look at the right side, if the price of the ice cream cone is zero, not a single unit is supplied by the seller. If again, if the price becomes $0.5, not a single unit of the commodity is supplied by the seller. If it further increases from zero point 0.5 to $1 and from 1 to $1.5 and so on, the quantity supplied also started to increases. The law of supply uh, operates, which basically shows that when the price of a commodity increases, the quantity supplied also increases. Now, if you look at the demand schedule, at $2, 7 units of the commodity are demanded. And again, if you look at the supply schedule, at $2, 7 units of the commodity are supplied. So at $2, the quantity demanded, when the price of the ice cream cone is $2, the quantities demanded is equal to the quantity supplied, and this is basically the equilibrium price. $2 is the equilibrium price, and 7 units from the demand schedule and from the supply schedule are the equilibrium quantity. Again, if we stay at the ice cream cone example, if, um, on one axis we have the price of ice cream cone and on another axis we have the quantity of the ice cream cone. So when the price of the ice cream cone increases, the quantity supplied also increases. Similarly, the a negatively sloped curve shows the demand curve, while the positively sloped curve shows the supply curve. At $2, 7 units of the commodity is demanded. So that is basically the equilibrium position. The point of intersection of the supply curve and the demand curve is basically the equilibrium in the market. $2 is the equilibrium price and 7 units are equilibrium quantity from the graph. Now, if we further move and we look at the other topic, surplus. Surplus can be defined as a situation in the market in which the quantity supplied becomes greater than the quantity demanded. Whenever the quantity supplied increases or um, increases from the quantity demanded, we consider this situation as surplus. There is excess supply or surplus of any commodity. Suppliers will lower the price to increase sales, thereby moving toward the equilibrium. Similarly, shortage is a situation in which the quantity demanded becomes greater than the quantity supplied, and there is excess demand or shortage. When the demand for a certain commodity increases, we consider it excess demand. Supplier will raise the price due to too many buyers chasing too few goods, thereby moving towards the equilibrium. If we again stay with the ice cream cone example and we want to know about the excess supply or the surplus situation, again we are given the market we are at equilibrium point when the at $2, 7 unit of the commodity is demanded. Suppose the price of the commodity increases from $2 to $2.5. At higher price, more unit of the commodity are supplied while looking at the supply curve, and lesser unit of the commodity are demanded at the demand curve. So the difference between the quantity supplied and quantity demanded is basically surplus. Again, if we again stay at the our market equilibrium, and we have a downward sloping demand curve and an upward sloping supply curve at $2, 7 units of the commodity are demanded, and we are staying at the equilibrium point. So if the price of the commodity is $1.5 lesser than the equilibrium price, at lower price, less amount of the supplier or less number of suppliers are willing to supply their commodity, while more people are willing to buy the commodity at a lower price. So what will happen? A shortage will be created. There are too few commodities are being followed by too many buyers. There are many buyers which want the commodity. So again, if we look at the previous excess supply example, what will happen? The option with the supplier to increase the demand is to lower the price. When the price decreases, what will happen? More and more people will enter into the market. When more and more people will enter into the market, what will happen? The demand will increases. When the price decreases, what will happen? The demand for the commodity increase, and we will move back to the equilibrium point, and we will go out of the surplus situation. If we are at a shortage type of situation in the market, well, what will happen? The buyers will be willing to pay at higher price. The seller will increase the price. At that higher price, the buyers are supposed to buy that commodity. So what will happen? The quantity supplied will increases. When the price increases, the supplier will be encouraged to supply more units of the commodity, and the people who are demanding or whose purchasing power falls short of that price, they will go out of the market, and we will move back to the equilibrium point, the point where the previous equilibrium position at $2 and 7 units of the commodity. Now, what will happen if a change occurs apart from the price? We have said that whenever a change occurs in the price, we move along the demand curve. But if a change occurs in factor of any other factor, for example, for demand, we have said that if the taste of the individual changes, if the income of the individual changes, etc., etc., the demand curve either shift positively or negatively. A positive shift in the demand curve indicates an increase in the demand. A negative shift in the demand curve shows a decrease in the demand. For supply, we have said that the raw materials, the number of sellers, uh, weather, etc., that plays a very crucial role in this regard. So they shift the supply curve. A positively shifting or a rightward shift of the supply curve indicates an increase in the supply, while a leftward shift of the supply curve shows a decrease in the supply. These shifting of the supply curve is or the demand curve is irrespective of the price. Other factors affect. So when other factors affect the demand curve or the supply curve or both of the curves, it shifts the demand curve or the supply curve. So when we are in market equilibrium and a change occurs in any of the shift factors of the demand curve or the supply curve, so it will have an impact on the market equilibrium. So how we are going to analyze the changes in the market equilibrium? There are basically three steps which are involved in analyzing the changes in the equilibrium. In the first step, we are going to check whether the event shift the supply curve or the demand curve or both of the curves. We are going to check whether the event that has occurred is the shift factor of the supply curve or the demand curve. In the second step, we are going to check whether the event positively affects the supply curve or demand curve, or negatively affects the supply curve or the demand curve. If the demand curve or the supply curve is positively affected, it will shift it rightward. If it is negatively affected, it will shift it leftward. And lastly, we are going to use the supply and demand diagram that to see how shifting of the demand curve or the supply curve affects the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. Now we have case number one, how an increase in demand affects the equilibrium. Suppose we are again in the market for ice cream cone and we are at equilibrium. We have discussed previously that our equilibrium was at $2 when the price was $2. 7 units of the commodity were demanded. A downward sloping curve shows the demand curve, while an upward sloping curve shows the supply curve. Suppose the weather changes. When the weather changes, the demand for ice cream increases. So weather is a shift factor of the demand curve. So whenever the weather changes, it affects the taste of the people. From winter to summer, when we move from winter to summer, what will happen? The taste of the people will change. When the taste of the people will change, they will move from, for example, hot coffee or tea to ice cream. So the demand for ice cream will increases, and that will have a positive effect on the demand curve. So the demand curve will shift rightward or upward. That upward or shifting of the demand curve has an impact on the equilibrium price and on the equilibrium quantity. The equilibrium price increases from $2 to $2.5. As the demand increases, the supplier are are encouraged to increase the price of the commodity. So we move from, and the equilibrium quantity also increases from 7 units to 10 units, and we move from the initial equilibrium position to the new equilibrium position. Similarly, what will happen if a decrease in the demand occurs? Suppose we are at initial equilibrium position and an earthquake reduces the supply of ice cream. For example, an earthquake occurs and it destroys the, the fields for sugar cane or any other factors are the it has an impact on the sugar industry, and which is a raw material in the production of ice cream. So what will happen? It has an impact in the production of ice cream. The supply of ice cream will certainly be affected. So what will happen? The supply curve will shift backward. A hurricane occurred and that hurricane has destroyed uh, raw materials or the factories in which the sugar or any other material that is produced for the production of ice cream. So what will happen? The supply curve will shift backward as a decrease in the supply has occurred. This decrease in the supply has occurred not due to price or any other factor. Rather, this has happened due to a natural disaster. So what will happen at new equilibrium? Yeah, at a new equilibrium position, the equilibrium price increases from $2 to $2.5, while the equilibrium quantity that reduces from 7 to 4 units. The decrease in the demand for the ice cream is due to increase in the price, while the decrease in the supply is due to the uh, earthquake or the natural disaster. So that will result to a lower quantity that is sold. What will happen if both the supply and the demand curve that shifts? Suppose a larger increase in the demand has occurred, so we were initially at initial equilibrium position and the demand curve shift from D1 to D2, and at the same time the supply curve also shift from S1 to S2. The decrease in the supply is smaller as compared to an increase in the demand. So what will happen? The equilibrium price will increases from P1 to P2, while the equilibrium quantity will also increases from Q1 to Q2. So if in certain cases, if the change in the demand is greater than the change in the supply, what will happen? Both the price and the quantity will increases. Again, if the change in the supply is greater as compared to the change in the demand, then what will happen? We move from the initial equilibrium position to the new equilibrium position. The price increases from P1 to P2, while the quantity demanded, the equilibrium quantity, rather than the quantity demanded, decreases from Q1 to Q2, and the initial equilibrium position moves from initial equilibrium to the new equilibrium position, resulting in an increase into the price and a decrease into the equilibrium quantity. Now, what happens to price and quantity when supply or demand shifts? If a no change occurs in demand and no change occur in the supply, so what will happen? The price remains the same and the quantity remain the same. If no change occurred in demand and an increase in supply occurs, the price goes down and the quantity goes up. If a no change occurs in demand, a decrease in supply results to an increase in the price and a decrease in the quantity. If an increase in the demand occurs and no change in supply occurs, what will happen? The price moves up and the quantity moves down. But if an increase in demand occurs and an increase in the supply also occurs, so the change in the price is ambiguous and the change and the quantity moves up. If an increase in demand occurs and a decrease in supply occurs, what will happen? The price increases while the change in the quantity is ambiguous. Similarly, a decrease in the demand occurs and what will happen? And no change in supply occurs. So price goes down and the quantity also goes down. If a decrease in the demand occurs and an increase in the supply also occurs at the same time, what will happen? The price goes down while the quantity demand is ambiguous. Similarly, if a decrease in demand occurs and at the same time a decrease in the supply also occurs, so the change in the price is ambiguous while the quantity moves down. So if we summarize what we have discussed so far in this lecture, in this whole chapter, let me state that economists use the model of supply and demand to analyze competitive markets. Competitive markets are type of markets in which there are large number of buyers, large number of sellers, and they are selling homogeneous products. So a single individual does not have any impact on the market. Similarly, a single seller does not have any impact on the market. So the model of supply and demand, it basically help us to analyze the competitive market. In competitive markets, there are many buyers and sellers, each of whom has a very little or no influence on the market price. So the in competitive market, single individual does not have any impact on the whole market, or single seller does not influence the market. Market equilibrium is basically determined by the intersection of the supply and the demand curve. The first 2 points are basically related to the lecture 8 and 7. um, the third point is basically related to is the summary of what we have discussed in this class. Market equilibrium is determined by the intersection of the supply and the demand curve. In the supply and the demand curve, they intersect with each other. On the demand curve, the people are going to demand different unit of the commodity at given price. On the supply curve, the seller are going to sell their commodity given different uh, number of prices. So when both the supply and the demand curve they intersect with each other, we get the market equilibrium. At equilibrium price, the quantity demanded becomes equal to the quantity supplied, and the behavior of the buyers and sellers naturally drives market towards the equilibrium. It's the buyer and the sellers which basically brings equilibrium into the market. Thank you. For any questions, you can contact me through my email. My email is given. Thank you.